Incumbency has its privileges, sometimes. Incumbent presidents are generally pretty safe from a primary challenge, but not always. We'll explain why one metric is the one to watch in 2020. Then, how many pets make America woof again? I figured we'd give that one a try. Different numbers make for something to chew on. I'm not going to do any more of those. Karin Brulliard from the Washington Post Animalia blog is here, so let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
So there are presidents who have been challenged by people in their own party. Jimmy Carter was one that we think about, the Ted Kennedy-Jimmy Carter thing, very famous in 1980. But there have been others, and there is talk now that Bill Weld, former governor of neighboring Massachusetts here, we're in the mid-Hudson Valley of New York State, is joining the Republican fray to take on Donald Trump. There's talk that there might be more. How realistic is that, and is there a way to gauge historically whether this is something that could hurt Donald Trump or whether this is just a historical anomaly?
Yeah. History's not on the side of those who want to, take on the incumbent of their own party. Of course, in the old days of politics, with the party bosses and the conventions being fairly set in advance,
that just never happened.
You didn't do it. But in 1968, we saw, of course, with the Gene McCarthy and then the Robert Kennedy challenges to Lyndon Johnson, and then we've seen it periodically as you identify. And so we want to take a look at, well, what does it make for success here? What do you need to have? And one of the things you want to have is you want to take on the president who has a low approval rating within his own party. So there becomes the opportunity.
So not just a low opinion rating. You can't just have a president that's not popular. He's got to be popular with his own party because you can't win the primaries unless you're talking to your party's voters.
Exactly. And if you have a president who's, within his own party at 50, 60%, well, then there's stuff on the table that you can gobble up if you're going to challenge. And we have seen interesting ones. So in the 76 election, Reagan does really well against non-elected incumbent Gerald Ford, and he takes it down to the convention and then becomes the nominee 4 years later. Ted Kennedy, not so much against Jimmy Carter, even though Carter's approval rating was 48. The candidates in 68 didn't do well. Pat Buchanan ran against a fairly popular George Bush, but did well in New Hampshire, but then fizzled after that. And that brings us up to the current stage now with Donald Trump and what's going to happen. And what I think is very interesting is his approval rating among Republicans is 89%. So if you're thinking of challenging this guy who spent all his capital politically on his base, that's the folks you're going to have to chip away at, and that's really a tall order.
Well, I think also what these examples also point to is the fact that each of these challengers, although Reagan goes on, to get the nomination 4 years later, each of these challengers don't do such a great job of getting the nomination at the time either.
None of them did.
And also the incumbents that they challenge end up losing in the general election as well.
So if you have 50% or thereabouts within your own party, it suggests weakness clearly perhaps among independents, certainly with the opposing party, and that's where you run into trouble electorally.
And this is something
that
President Trump right now is certainly not dealing with. He is very popular among Republicans, as you mentioned, with his 89% approval rating among Republicans. And even when we took a look in one of our polls recently, we didn't measure Weld because I don't think he was on the radar at the time, but we did measure Kasich and Romney among Republicans, and they were not particularly popular, particularly up against Trump among Republicans.
So this approval rating within the party, though, that's the metric to watch because as we sit here right now, nothing's happened to move that number for Donald Trump. But we also haven't heard anything from the special counsel. And there is news every day about all kinds of things that could change the president's standing with his party. Nothing to date has. But that's the metric, I think, what we're identifying here is the metric to watch to give you an idea of whether he would be challenged.
Yeah, and if you don't
within
want to
his own
follow
party.
our polls, just look at the Republican senators and where they start criticizing President Trump.
Well,
Because when they
that's
do,
already
that's-
already happened on the national emergency, but we haven't seen much of a move away from him on the base yet.
Yeah, no, for
so
sure.
we'll see. But I think that's an interesting metric to watch. What is clear though is that this has nothing to do with what the other party will do. So, yeah, Donald Trump has an incredibly high popularity rating approval rating within his own party. He's got an incredibly low one with the other party, and that creates opportunity that it seems like a handful of people are willing to try and take advantage of.
Handfuls.
Very big handful.
Handfuls. No,
Gorilla hands.
we have lots of Democrats, and I think every Democrat that probably has an interest in ever being president has either entered the fray.
covers the ages from 37 years old to I think 78 or 79. So we're covering all generations of eligible Democrats right now.
So I think that also if we take a look, the leaders in the Democratic primary are those with the biggest name recognition, former Vice President Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, who ran last time, and then we look at also other popular Democrats, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker. They've all been had a moment on the national stage, so it makes sense that that they are also leading the pack. But if we look at some of the polling, there's also a very, very large undecided among Democratic voters. And I think there's certainly going to be a long, long road to the nomination this time around.
And as we've said, throughout the year, and we'll say as we get even closer to the primaries, the early toss-up numbers for a Democratic field or any field at this point are very, very bad predictors of who's going to go in. But I think the question is, what happens if Joe Biden doesn't get in? What's going to happen to the Democrats on this? And I think that's something that I would say categorically, I just don't know.
Switching gears here a little bit, if you've ever, frequented any large city or large suburb, in, midday or early evening, you may be struck by the number of four-legged inhabitants that are out kind of strutting their stuff. But have you ever wondered how many people own a pet? Well, we've got Karin Brulliard, reporter and editor for the Washington Post's Animalia blog, joining us today. Hi, Karin.
Hi, how are you?
Thanks so much. Before we get into the numbers of pet owners and pets, I do want to know, as an animal lover, I really want to know, how do you get a gig like this? The Animalia blog, that is just so awesome.
Yeah, people ask me that question a lot, and I feel like I need to be very quiet about it because, or my bosses will take it away from me. I proposed the idea. It was a process, but I pitched it, said that we could write intelligently about something that people care a lot about, and shockingly, my editors went for it.
So why is it necessary or important for us to know how many pets there are?
Well, it's probably not important for me or for you. Well, it might be a little bit more for me because I write about animals, but for most people, it's not really important. Depending on who you ask, though, it's important in a lot of places. It's certainly important to the pet products industry, which is one that I think anyone can see or guess is expanding exponentially. I mean, it's just sort of booming in all sorts of pet services and pet products, from expensive pet foods to mobile grooming trucks, that kind of thing. So it's important to them to know how many pets there are. It's important veterinarians to know how many pets there are, how many patients they might have coming through their doors, or what kinds of patients they might have coming through their doors. Maybe fewer cats than there used to be, but maybe more backyard chickens. And then, there are some researchers who would say that it's important to know for epidemiological studies, for example, if you want to know accurate things about rabies, the occurrence of rabies, or other veterinary or zoonotic, diseases. It's important to know sort of your baseline.
Well, at the Poll Hub here, we are all pet lovers. Two of the three of us have a pet. I actually have 4 dogs.
And 3 horses.
Well, yeah, but
They don't live at home.
many people think of horses, unfortunately, as livestock, even though I do think of them as pets as well. But how, the number of pets and the number of households who actually own a pet has been disputed. In other words, there are a lot of different measures that are bandied about. And if you do, go to Google or some search engine, you're likely to find different numbers of how many pets there are actually in the United States. How does that come about?
Well, if you were to Google how many pets are there in the United States, you almost certainly, the first hit you would get, or one of the first ones, would be from what's called the American Pet Products Association. This is an industry group that does a survey every 2 years of not just sort of the numbers of pets people have and how many they have, but also and probably most important to this organization, how much they're spending on their pets and what kinds of things they're purchasing for their pets. So that's the one you're going to see most often. And that source has sort of pretty consistently shown the numbers rising quite quickly over recent years. Another source that would come up quickly is the American Veterinary Medical Association. That's the association of all the veterinarians in the United States. They do a survey every 5 years, so not as often. And their numbers, and the reason I wrote about this recently is because they came out with their study at the end of last year. And the numbers they put out were pretty different from the Pet Products Association. They showed a lower percentage of households with pets. They showed a declining number of cats in the United States. And I was sort of interested in why that might be. Why would there be dropping numbers of cats? But also, why is there that difference between these two sort of often cited sources?
What kind of reaction did you get to this particular article, and also to your blog generally when you put things out? What kinds of, do you get the pet owners, pet lovers chiming in, or do you get the what am I supposed to do with the barking dog next door kind of reaction?
Well, let's see. So to this article, I don't know that I got a lot of response. This one sort of falls a bit into the wonky, nerdy category of,
You're
a
talking
very
to us.
deep dive
Yes,
on
this is
pet
why you're-
statistics.
This is why you're on
Yep,
Poll Hub.
yeah. So
Welcome
you
to
guys
the
called
nerd
me.
zone.
You guys called me, but I'm not sure that the average person was, But in any case, I was interested, and my colleague Scott Clement, who's our director of polling, was interested, so we did it anyway. I guess if I were to say, generally, I get quite a bit of reader response, but I don't just write about pets. I write about anything that I guess falls in the category of where humans and animals intersect. So obviously that includes pets. I also write about wildlife. I write about some science, some research on animals. And so I don't write so much about, advice on pet, like what do you do about a barking dog?
I figured that as much.
But yeah, people are interested in pets. People, what's clear from this research is that no matter how you slice it, we've got a lot of animals. We like our animals. We spend a lot of money on them. And so people care about them.
So when you did this, and you mentioned that Scott Clement is also in the article, and he's works in the polling unit there at the Post. So a lot of the answers, I think what we saw in the article was a lot of the answers that we get to questions about polls. He gets into your article there, which is why the different results, different methodologies, different ways the polls are done, these kinds of things. But in the numbers, what struck me was that there's a pretty high range from the census number, which is about 50% of American households, 49% have pets, to the top end, which is 68%. That's a big range. Is there anything that you were able to find out when you were, researching this and talking to any of the people who are in the field on this to get a sense of whether it really is 50 or 70? Because, is it 1 in 2 or is it 3 in 4? Practically 3 in 4. It just seems like a really big difference.
Well, I mean, and that is why we wrote about this. We wanted to understand where these big differences are coming from and what might be the most accurate. So here I'm going to sort of channel Scott a bit as well as experts we talked to, because I am not a polling expert. But the sort of basic answer, is that both the Pet Products Association and the Veterinary Medical Association use opt-in online polls, surveys. And so this is, the people who are taking these surveys are self-selecting, right? They're choosing to take it. Yep. It's not a random sample. So you're starting off with a group of people who are probably more likely to be pet owners. Both organizations say they make an effort to, adjust afterward to control for, to make their sample a representative of U.S.
Yeah, we call that weighting.
demographics.
Yeah, we weight the sample.
But yeah, so you know about waiting. Okay, so I'm talking to people who know this.
Yeah.
But anyway, probably people listening to your podcast know much more than I do.
That's fine.
But anyway, but what we were, what we tried to explain here is that even when you do that, according to a lot of polling experts, you're still sort of starting out with a sample that's biased from the outset. The lower range and pretty consistent were based on randomized samples. I mean, the one that's based on census data is not only a huge sample, but it's done in person, and they do follow-up interviews. I think the conclusion we came away with is that by no means can we say that the pet products industry is, fiddling with the numbers to make it look like there are more pets than, I'm not going to come out and say that, but you're right. I mean, this is an organization that obviously wants there to be more pets. The American Housing Survey, which started asking a question about pets in 2013, did so only as part of a sort of questions about people's preparedness for disasters, what kind of evacuation procedures they might have in place. And so part of that was asking about pets, and probably this comes out of what we know happened after Hurricane Katrina, is that there was some pretty good research that showed a lot of people stayed behind because they didn't want to leave their animals.
And also, Jay's dog, Orange, is a Katrina pup.
Well, there you go.
Having moved up to New York State.
So
after
one quick other thing that I noticed.
Well, we're full circle here.
One other quick thing that I noticed is that the 3 samples from the industry, they asked about dogs and cats. The census, very smartly, they just asked about pets. They didn't get on that divide there. Who's got more dogs? Who has more cats? They stayed out of that one. Seems smart.
Right. Although the pet products industry and the veterinary one, if you look at their actual surveys, I mean, they're the size of telephone books, and they go way deep into what kind of pets people have,
Yeah, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that that you're probably less likely to have more than 7 animals under your roof. If I include your barn, Barb, you're going 4 plus 3. Is Barb the winner here in terms of pets?
Certainly in terms of weight.
I have 1 cat, so I'm not going to win this one.
But just also mention that when we're looking at the opt-in surveys, the purpose of the survey, I think, is different. And you made a really good point, Karin, in the sense that the goal of the U.S. Census Survey is very different than the pet products and the veterinary survey. In other words, if you have an opt-in online panel, you actually want to be talking to pet owners so that you can find out about, their experiences, their interests, and their opinions. It's when those surveys are then used to generalize to the larger population and try to quantify something like pet ownership that I think they probably get into a little bit of trouble.
Right, and that's what a few people we spoke to said. They said, look, for these organizations, the actual population figures probably aren't even that important. What they want to know mostly is about how much people are spending and what they're buying. And they may get perfectly useful data out of this kind of survey,
Karin Brulliard reporter and editor at really the job. I should just say it. She's got the job at the Post that we all want. She is the author of the Animalia blog at the Post, and she knows a lot about polls now. It turns out, thanks to this article and bringing around a poll hub. Thank you so much for coming on, Karin.
All right, thanks for having me.
That will do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. Thank you, Mary Griffith, our executive producer, and thank you, Kenny Marples, for cleaning us up, our editor.
Yes, he will be working overtime on this one. So we'd also like to thank, as we do each week, the Roper Center Archives at Cornell, who provide us with lots of data all the time about survey questions and results historically, so we can do trend when we need to.
And send your questions to us. The best way to do it is on social media at Marist Poll on Facebook and on Twitter. Also, we'll link in the show notes to the information for Karin if you want to start following the Animalia blog and send her pet questions. Oh, boy, she's going to regret we just told him to do that. And we'll see you back here next time. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe.